Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Tucker Edmonds, and I am the Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture. Welcome to the final episode of the second season of the Center's Religion and series. Religion and is a series of monthly conversations between leading academics and practitioners hosted by the Center to engage and enhance critically important conversations on the state of religion in America. The last episode was an important and eye-opening discussion on religion, spirituality, museums, and the future of museum practice. I want to thank Lois Silverman, Ben Garcia, Eric Williams, and Yvonne Chareau for their just fantastic engagement. Please, if you didn't get a chance to catch it, check it out on our YouTube channel or go to our website and you can find a video of this important conversation. This year has really been an amazing one with a record number of folks who are new to the center and new to our platform. Over the course of this second season, I've been kind of blown away that 60% of the people who have attended have been faculty and graduate students, but 40% of the folks who are logging on for our conversations are folks that are outside of the university, folks who are new to this conversation, and oftentimes folks who are, for their first time, are learning about our center. The other statistic that jumps out to me over and over again is that 98% of the people who have joined us have said that they would recommend this conversation to other folks. And so we want to ask folks to continue to share this, to continue to use it. And then the last statistic that I always share with folks is that over or close to about 80% of people say they have considered using this or have used this in public teaching or in university teaching. And that's just one of the things that we love about this, that this is not just a one-time conversation, but we hope that this is a conversation that people can come back to, you can use in classroom, you can use in community spaces, and that you can hopefully use to engender important conversations about religion and American culture more broadly. And finally, we just had so many suggestions for topics and for engagement. And I just want to let folks know that we're planning for the third season, and we're going to be bringing some of those conversations and topics into the queue. And we just thank you for that feedback. And many of those conversations that some of you all suggested in our feedback we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks after this episode, the first weekend in June, we will be in Indianapolis in person for our Biennial Conference, June 2nd to June 4th. And we would love for folks, if you haven't registered, there's still a little bit more time for you to do that, to join us in Indianapolis for a conversation where we will be bringing together scholars and graduate students and thinkers of religion and American culture to look at topics as broadly as religious nationalism to the role of gaming and digital media. I know that our tech person is dropping the information about our schedule into the chat right now. And so we would love for you to join us if you could. But let me turn to today. Today, we are turning to religion and teaching in the public sphere. And we have an amazing panel. And I'm so excited that you all are here to enjoy and engage this conversation. As the modern university has been transforming, and there has been a growing appetite, not only just for the study of religion, but the engagement of religion and religious subcultures, we've seen scholars of religion and American culture having increasing opportunities to share their content, their information, and their methodology in a number of different venues, right? And so for this episode, we're gonna talk about what that teaching looks like in these venues outside of the university, outside of the traditional graduate seminar. We're talking about what does it look like when you're talking to government officials? What does it look like when you're producing a documentary? What does it look like on the blogosphere or in the digital spaces that we all inhabit and have become increasingly more used to over these last 3 years? And so today we have 4 engaged scholar teachers who are going to come together and help us think about what does teaching and engagement look like beyond the university, and what does it mean to impact these broad segments of the public sphere. I want to just remind folks that are joining us either in the Zoom or on Facebook that please use the Q&A feature to drop your questions in. We will look at those, and Phil and I will be able to look at those throughout the conversation so that they can engage those questions throughout today's conversation and really been able to include and involve you in our discussion. Now let me introduce the host for today's discussion, and he will then go on to introduce our panelists. Dr. Philip Goff is the Chancellor's Professor of American Studies and the Executive Director of the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. He has been the director of the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture since 2000. He is an award-winning teacher, and he has written about classroom textbooks and co-edited themes in religion and American culture with Paul Harvey. He has been dedicated, really since I've known him, to public teaching and has been involved in this outside of the university kind of praxis for a while as a scriptwriter, as a consultant, as an interviewee across many aspects of American religion and public life. He's also the co-author and editor of a number of volumes, and I will not go into all of those details, but I would like to kind of give as much time to this amazing conversation as we possibly can today. So please join me in welcoming Phil Goff, and he will introduce the rest of today's esteemed panelists.
Thank you, Joseph. And thank you, Joseph, for your work in this series for the past 2 years. Joseph helped envision this and took it and ran and has really been in charge of every one of these, all 20 episodes. So thanks to him, and also to Nate Wynn behind the scenes, who runs everything. Nothing would happen without him. And Lauren Schmidt is always sort of monitoring the Facebook feed for this. I'm very excited about this episode because when I first got my doctoral degree, my first job was in Los Angeles. And it's in the early 90s, and I get there, and it's just about when Hollywood and documentary makers begin to realize that religion was an important topic. And there weren't a lot of scholars of religion in Southern California then, so I got tapped by a number of different entertainment and documentary makers to come in and be an advisor, to help write scripts, to be an interviewee in a number of things. And I got thrown into public engaged teaching, and I got a taste for it, and I knew that this was something I wanted to always be a part of my career. So jump forward now, here we are 30 years later, and boy, if ever we need public teachers talking about religion and its role in American culture, and the role of American culture and religion, it's now. And so I'm really excited to have these three to talk with about this important topic. I'll quickly introduce everyone, and you'll learn more about everyone through the conversation. Our first is Andrew Agapor. He has a PhD in religious studies from UNC Chapel Hill, Tar Heels. He's a scholar, a journalist, and a comedian who lives in Durham, North Carolina. His scholarship focuses on the contemporary intersections of religion and science. You've probably read him plenty of times on Religion Dispatches, where he co-founded The Cubit, which is a blog about religion and science on Religion Dispatches. He's also worked the past several years with Peter Manso in curating an exhibit on religion and science at the Smithsonian, which just opened recently. So I'm sure he's going to invite you to come. And maybe also he'll talk about his role as a comedian and how it has helped shape the way he talks publicly about his work. Second is Kyati Joshi. She is a professor of education at Fairleigh Dickinson University. She's a public intellectual who works on the intersection of race, religion, and immigration in the United States. She's very busy outside the classroom, working with educators and policymakers and community leaders, running workshops and sharing her scholarship and expertise with federal, state, and local officials. I'm sure you've seen her on C-SPAN and MSNBC, heard her on Voice of America and NPR's Morning Edition. I will say, when I got to Indianapolis and I embedded public teaching into this mentoring program run by the center 20 years ago, Kyati was in the very first cohort. So I'm really happy to see her here doing what she does. And lastly is Jeff Sharlet, Frederick Sessions Beebe class of 35, professor in the art of writing at Dartmouth College. Many of us know Jeff through his book, The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, which was subsequently made into a Netflix series. Of course, he's a contributing editor to Harper's and Rolling Stone. You've seen his excellent essays for years in Vanity Fair, New York Times Magazine, GQ, Esquire, Mother Jones, The Nation. I'm just all over the place. And it's no surprise that Jeff has won the National Magazine Award for Reporting and also the Molly Ivins Prize. Also, he has co-created 2 online journals and publications, which have been of great use to those of us in this field, killing the Buddha and also the revealer. And so I welcome everybody. I'm really excited to have you all here. And I want us to just open up first by thinking about how each of you use the skills you have in different ways and in talking to the public. And even in the introduction, it's clear that each of you came to this by different paths. And so I want maybe just each of us to take a couple of minutes to talk about how you got here and what interests you in teaching beyond the classroom. And Kyati, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks again for inviting me. And yeah, Phil, we go way back, and I'm so thankful for all your support all along the way in so many different ways, including for my most recent book. So thank you. I work, my kind of everyday day job, if you will, is teaching in the School of Education where I teach classes for in-service and pre-service teachers. I also work with teachers and principals and superintendents out in the world, and doing trainings and teacher education. I mean, one of the first things that stuck out to me is like, they're not learning anything about all they can do with religion in public schools, because there's this fear and there's this sense that they're not supposed to talk about religion, period. Because of some of the major Supreme Court cases in the 50s and 60s, there was the sense that government took religion out of schools. Well, government didn't take religion out of schools, where government took Bible writings and scripture out of schools, but not religion out of schools. And because of that, teachers have stayed away. So we have a lot of work to do in public education. And most of the time, most don't know all they can do. And so that's kind of one of the ways that I've been active. And then simultaneously, I'm kind of involved in civic and political affairs here in New Jersey. And so seeing who are the elected officials that are coming out to different religious communities and different houses of worship, and who doesn't come out, even though they say they represent all. Right. And so I'm always having, seeing that and seeing who's comfortable and who's not, and then trying to talk with their staff and make sure they know to get out to this event or that event. So those are a couple of the ways I'm engaged.
Andrew, can we think about yours?
Yeah, thank you. And such an honor to be here. Thanks to all of y'all for having me. My way into religious studies was first as an undergrad. I took a religious studies class, and I was raised Muslim/Christian by a British and an Iranian person. So I had a very multi-faith kind of background, and religious studies was like a revelation to me, that you could kind of take a step back and study religion as a thing. Blew my mind. And I decided I wanted to get a PhD in the study of religion and came here to UNC Chapel Hill. And where my path maybe got a little bit unique or straight off was that I started working at Religion Dispatches. I just fell in love with the format of responding to the news, trying to have current conversations, and taking religion and science, which is often very abstract and like overly kind of a certain type of white male philosophy. And I got really interested in how we can take these abstract concepts, but make them current, responding to news and seeing what kind of communities could be formed in that way. If that wasn't bad enough, then I also discovered comedy for the first time. It was as a grad student that I was kind of, I guess when you teach, you have a captive audience. So I noticed that it was fun to tell jokes to my students. Later, I realized that they had to laugh, but then I took some improv classes and fell in love with the art form. Improv, you all may have watched it before. It's where you're showing up with no script, no plans, and creating scenes, kind of like maybe a 3 or 4 act play, where you and maybe 5 other people are completely creating things from scratch. And I fell in love with the practice, the fact that you could create these subtle rules like yes and, where you affirm what someone says, or rules about how you want to pick one funny thing and ramp it up. That once we started doing these rules, all of a sudden religion kept bubbling up. You start doing improv and all of a sudden it's a ceremony, or you're in the afterlife. And so it was really fun to perform and teach improv and eventually do some stand-up and storytelling. And once again, finding that religion was everywhere I looked. I'd gotten into comedy as an escape from day-to-day religious studies. I thought it would be like a hobby. And sure enough, there was just religion everywhere there. And I also made I'll stop talking soon, but all of those experiences inspired me to make a one-person show called Zara. It's about my childhood being raised Muslim in the American South. And what was really cool about that show was kind of discovering that young version of me who used religious studies to make sense of himself, that doing the work of a one-person show where you're trying to keep people laughing for 75 minutes while telling true stories about your past. It was really fun to find that religious studies was once again relevant, the concepts from religion. And the show is set against the history of monotheism, going back to Zarathustra, who we named our daughter after. If that doesn't sound egotistical enough. Anyway, that's the crazy path. Now I found myself doing comedy and working on different religious studies projects as a freelancer. Honored to be here. Sorry for talking so long.
No, this is exactly what I want to know about. Yeah, Jeff, what about you? You come from a very different path.
Yeah, I kind of come the opposite direction from outside of academia, not an academic. I have an undergraduate degree and it's from Hampshire College, which means it's shaped like a Frisbee because it's sort of a hippie college. I didn't do the academic route. Instead, I took a job at a place called the National Yiddish Book Center, where I was editing a magazine about Yiddish culture. And I was right out of college and they sort of told us kind of try to avoid religion, which was easy. And because there is this vast kind of either secular or deliberately antagonistic to religion kind of culture in Yiddish. And I always love this sort of one line from the poet Yankov Glatching. He's writing about the Yiddish anarchist ball, which was this annual event, and they'd have a pig roast. And the pig roast was sort of to sort of say, see God, see how much we don't believe in you. You're still in that dialogue, right? And it was there actually I met Peter Manseau, who Andrew has collaborated with, and we began collaborating on a website called Killing the Buddha, which became a book that we wrote together. As Andrew has written a book with Peter, so he's sort of one of the conjunctions here. And I discovered as a writer who was really interested in kind of what's today called long form narrative nonfiction literary journalism, that one, if I wrote about religion, I had this wide open field, because in journalism, it was really just sort of you didn't want to get stuck on the religion beat, the God beat. It was just this wide open area that was either pious or ignored, or only dealt with in terms in strictly political terms. And it was this way of saying, okay, I want to write about people's lives, and that this gets me beyond the stack of facts, because even as I'm writing about lived religion and how it's practiced and so on, I'm writing also often, not always, but often about belief, or about the rejection of belief, or different relationships, certainly in the American context. And that's sort of where I come to this. And now I find myself back in academia. I don't know, it's a steady job. It's a steady job, but I still am engaged in sort of writing for a broader audience. So that's it seems like we all have sort of pretty unusual circuitous roots, and that's mine.
Well, I want to stick with the idea of audience for a second, because we talk about public teaching. There is no one public, right? There are publics out there, and so maybe we'll kind of start with Jeff here first, I suppose. Who do you consider to be your publics or your audience, and how does the nature of your audience sort of shape how you engage with them?
I mean, it sounds glib, but it's not as glib as it sounds to say I consider my public, who buys my books. And that can be a surprising crowd. And I think this book of mine called The Family, which is about the fellowship, or also known as the family, the folks who do the National Prayer Breakfast. And I sort of stumbled into joining them for a little while and then discovered there was this vast archive at Wheaton College, so I could tell this history that had been just really neglected. Although I'm not an academic, it just seemed like a book that, for a lot of reasons, need a pretty hardy footnote apparatus. And my publisher of that book, HarperCollins, was just, no, get rid of the footnotes. You're just going to kill your book. No one will read a book with footnotes. And in the end, I did it my way, and they're just sort of like, wash our hands of it. This is not going to work. And through hook and crook and circumstance, and that really is the only way bestsellers happen, it winds up on the bestseller list. And I remember saying to them, like, oh, great, now you're going to start putting advertising money behind it. And they're like, no, this is a weird fluke. Books with footnotes like that just don't go on the bestseller list. And I'm like, but it's there. And it stayed there for a while. And I remember they just were so insistent that this was academic. Yet I would travel the country talking to all kinds of different audiences in churches and in atheist groups and just bookstores and so on. You talk to educated people, plenty of people who hadn't had the luxury or privilege of an education. They were all engaging with it. And so I think I'm hesitant to define a public, because I've learned in this kind of wonderful way, it's so much more unpredictable. And I think that's maybe something for the scholars involved. I often, scholars talk to me about how do I reach out to the public. Unfortunately, they sometimes think of sort of simplifying or even dumbing down their ideas. And I don't think that's what the translation involves. Those readers, they're out there. And that may not mean if you want a super bestseller, and it's going to stay there forever. Yeah, maybe you have to simplify it. But otherwise, I think write your book and trust that it's out there. And I think recently we've seen a number of scholars do that with university press books that have in fact drawn wide public audiences.
Yeah, Kyati, your book on white Christian privilege, you're writing for certain audiences there, and you're also trying to persuade in certain ways, right? Hopefully, but then you're also dealing sort of as a consultant, basically, with policymakers. You've got a number of different audiences or publics out there. How do you see yourself in that?
So I think what runs across all the different constituencies, whether it's policymakers, educators, folks in my own Indian American and South Asian American community and the larger Asian American community, is this group of folks who actually want to do more in our country around equity and justice, but just actually don't have the information. And that's what I ended up writing this book after doing like almost 8 years of public workshops and lectures to people. And I would do a fair amount around history and law where it intersected around race and religion. And people were just like, I don't know this stuff. But boy, if I had learned this, it makes sense then where our country is today. And this was pre-Trump, okay? This was pre-2016 even. And so regardless of the actual public, if you will, I'm writing for folks who want to have more knowledge in order to be able to take more action or understand why they should be doing what they're doing for equity and justice instead of just doing it. So I would say that that's really who I have in mind. And sometimes this is teenagers, and sometimes these are folks who are of my parents' generation, and everyone in between, but it's the folks who want to know more.
Well, Andrew, I'm thinking about your situation where, you do short form writing for dispatches, and which I love, by the way. I mean, I love on our own, those who are on the center's Facebook site, that we pump out a lot of those. We want people to see that. So you're writing those, and you're also writing descriptions for a museum exhibit, which are really short. How do you do it? What's in your mind about who's reading these things?
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, back in the religion dispatches days, it was, I guess we were writing like 800 to 1,000 words. And, what was great about RD was that they're not chasing clicks, it wasn't all about just getting numbers, but nonetheless, that was always kind of secretly the goal. And so that's a style of writing where you're trying to engage a public that's maybe already there, right? You're reaching that public in their bubble, which is a great thing and an important process. And you also find people elsewhere. With the museum, it's a different challenge, a different opportunity. It's yeah, you're writing like for the book of the exhibit. There's this this is an automaton from the 1500s that was the first self-enclosed robot that we have in recorded history. It's the oldest one, and it prays. So like, that's amazing to me. And so for the book, I wrote this like 3,000 words on why I thought it was really cool. There's a robot who prayed. And of course that was too long. So we got it maybe down to 1,000. And then when it came time to write the caption, it's got to be 100 words. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a little bit painful for me in ways that I had to learn to like write through the pain. Because what I think of as amazing as someone who's trained in the scholar stuff, at first it was that what struck me as amazing about this thing was a really big constellation of ideas that all came together. And in writing, you're trying to like point to all these different parts. Here's the history of technology. Here's the fact that it's cool. Here's the fact that it was made during the Reformation. Then when it comes down to the caption, there is that exercise of imagining the broadest possible public. I think like 5 million people walk through those doors every year, and they're coming to look at this robot for a hot second before they go to look at the Julia Child kitchen. And so here's a robot who prays is about as far as you can get. And what's been and then stand-up is kind of in the middle. Stand-up, you have maybe a 20-minute set where you can really warm people up, set up your character, and then build in, say something you really want to say, and then build yourself back out. Anyway, in each of those ways of engaging a public, I feel like it's imagining the whole world in the eyes of a single person, like often stand up, you're looking at one person because that's where the light is, or imagining one kid looking at a caption and hoping that you get it right.
Well, Andrew, I have to ask, our friend Peter Gardella has written in, how did the robot move? Was there someone inside? It's not about the topic here, but I'm interested too. Can you give?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So there's a key wound spring. There's like brass clockwork inside, and you wind it up, and it walks in a trapezoid, and it has a rosary that it brings to its lips, and it's got a little mouth that moves. And if you're interested, not only can you visit the exhibit, which is going to be open for the next year at the National Museum of American History, they're not going to let you wind it up, but you can definitely look at it. But we also are making a choose your own adventure video game where he's the main character and you are getting him to his home. It might flop, but there's a video game based on his crazy history if y'all ever want to check it out, coming up this August.
All right.
Just for a plug, yeah.
I'll remind those who are watching right now that if you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A. And the second half of these always get more and more conversational. We try to introduce what people out there are wondering as well. But I want to throw something, I guess, to all of you. I guess I'll start actually with Jeff. Are there any sort of personal or professional costs in publicly writing like this? I mean, there's pushback, right, on some of the projects.
Yes. And I think increasingly probably in the United States, in the context of writing about religion in America, those costs are going to grow. I mean, I write a lot about various forms of conservative and right-wing and occasionally fascist religion, right? And mostly of the Christian variety, and also in the ways in which it infuses other events. So for instance, the Buffalo Killer, this I just wrote about his screed, his manifesto for Vanity Fair. And he says he's not a Christian, but he lived according to Christian values because to be white is to be Christian and to be Christian is to be white, which is about as straight ahead a statement of Christian nationalism as I understand it, as I can imagine. So when you write about these things, yeah, you're going to get attacked, and you're not going to get attacked. I mean, I've been doxxed. I got a stack of death threats, and I've had people come to readings. I've had people be violent. This is the arena right now, I think. And to sort of imagine, and I think it's important though for those who are engaged with it, of course, obviously to try and think beyond that, but also to understand that kind of high-minded conversation that is the luxury of academia, is not the public square.
Can I ask how that has facing violence and getting doxxed, has that affected the journalism in any way? Or do you feel like you're a different type of journalist over the years based on assessing safety, or even just the way that you are embodied in the spaces where you're doing your reporting?
I mean, I have, the fact is I'm a cishet white male, so that becomes complicated. I'm also Jewish, which they typically find out if it's not up front, right? And that becomes an issue, which becomes complicated because on the one hand, that allows me a certain safety that others don't have. On the other hand, can often enrage people who see me as a kind of traitor, like I'm the one who is not supposed to be doing this. It does. I mean, I'll say, look, it affects what you write about and when you decide to write about it. I can tell you the biggest story I ever decided to turn down was actually a kind of a smaller thing. Was a magazine asked me to write a big piece about Scientology, and I was like, no, that's a bit too far. I'm just not incredibly litigious, right? I mean, they sue, and it doesn't matter whether there's also the sort of the menace that you're kind of dealing with. The people will sue, even though they know that they're going to lose. They can afford the legal fees that are going to go with that, and they know you can't. And so you might turn down a thing. I mean, even right now, I'm sort of thinking about how to write about the rise in anti-Semitism in the United States. And that's a really difficult thing to write about for a magazine like Vanity Fair. And to sort of thread that needle and find a way to tell a story, but also, stay safe doing it.
Kyati, you've written on some difficult topics.
Yeah, and I will say that I both write and wrote, the book on white Christian privilege, and also do the work out here in New Jersey and elsewhere with school districts, for example. And you all know the big rallying cry for the last year has been critical race theory. And so, you've got folks showing up to boards of education thinking they know what critical race theory is, and they don't. And so for me, actually, I've experienced I got some targeted hate mail that was quite cheeky, is what I would say. Talking, well, you're Indians, your hotel's not teepees, right? And stuff like that, dot heads, not feathers, right? Okay. But then they also talked about in another email knowing where my mom lives and listing my family's address, right? To the point where then Homeland Security was involved. And I had sheriff's officers patrolling my house every day for 4 months. So there's that. And then I kind of juxtaposition that to, I did a parent event with a school district I was working with this past October. And I did the amount of mental energy spent on working with this district, because the parents, there were just a small group of parents that were fighting the superintendent because they hired me to be the consultant to work with the teachers at every turn. It was exhausting. And I showed up to do a parent event, and I hope to never experience this again, but I had a body man. I presented to a room full of 200 parents with an armed guard next to me. And from the corner of my eye, I could see his gun. And that was just awful. I never want to do that again. And at the same time, I kind of have to, I don't feel like I have for someone who does this work, now is not the time to say, hey, I'm not going to do it. Right. And so you're kind of stuck, and you end up spending a tremendous amount of mental energy. And then the family's worried, everybody's worried about what's going to happen. So that is tough. And I will say that I will take the email threats any day over the in real life out in the world having to present with an armed guard next to me.
Sure. Yeah.
Was there a really strong contrast after this kind of manufactured, critical race theory culture war? I mean, you wrote the textbook on teaching diversity and social justice and inclusion. Like that's you're a major part of that. Was it like night and day all of a sudden?
It was, and in some ways, in some good ways, and then in some not so unfortunate, ways, right? 5 years ago, sometimes a superintendent would call me, and we'd really have to make the case to the Board of Ed as to why this important work is important in terms of teachers incorporating anti-bias, anti-racist topics into the curricula, right? Where after January of 2017, I've never had to actually make that argument to secure funding for anyone. But then it was what happened after, kind of the summer of racial reckoning. And then folks had enough. And the right wing, targeting, putting critical race theory out there, it worked. And let's face it, the right is very good at messaging, right? And co-opting tools and terms.
Kyati, I wonder about, you said that if you do this kind of work, now you can't stop doing it now. And I think I'm only aware of that because we're both describing this sort of a fairly high cost. And I can imagine, as I think about this public, people out there saying, oh, actually, well, I don't do this work yet. Maybe I won't start because I don't want to get down that track. But I think instead it's almost maybe what's demanded and of the sort of the scholarly journalistic community, and it's already there, but more and more of, is there have to be these kind of networks of solidarity and care, so that people have got your back, I've got my friends and allies who know what's
Right.
going on and who know what a doxing is like and so on. So it's not quite so alien, and that has to be in some ways almost a part of public writing right now.
Yeah.
A subject.
Yeah, I haven't written about this extensively, but certainly I have my crew that I reach out to for support, and I try to lend support because it's constant. I mean, and for me, I'm also trying to support teachers. So when we have the weekend that we had, which is shooting of Korean Americans on Friday, the shooting of African Americans on Saturday, the shooting at a Taiwanese church by an Asian person, which brings up complexities that I think a lot of folks just don't deal with. Monday, teachers are like, I need help, right? And so we have to provide it. And whether it's journalists and educators and scholars, and all of us have a role to play, and we need folks to step up.
I've got another good question here, and it's just where I was about to go. I was going to ask it along the lines of, are there other kind of costs, as in, lots of scholars might be interested in doing more publicly engaged work, but their chairs or their deans don't want them to. They want them to do what it takes, to get, first of all, you've got to impress the search committee, first of all, right? You've got to impress your P&T committee or your promotion committee. How should we think about our work sort of as part of a professional portfolio that, we don't keep separate, that this is all part of what we're supposed to be doing? And how can universities offer more support this way? Andrew, maybe I'll start with you. What do you think?
That's such a great question. I'm maybe the worst person to answer because I finished the PhD. I never went on the tenure track job market, partly because of the Smithsonian gig and partly because none of my friends are getting jobs and it seemed really stressful. And I was having a lot of fun doing comedy. And so my kind of vibe these days is that like I really only, I do, like I do public scholarship because I enjoy it and I have friends who do it and I like doing it as one of my many gigs. I would love it if universities supported it more because that would, make it easier to do the work. But what has been really interesting about these last few years is that with endowment funding and with so many universities and centers like yours wanting to reach more publics and promote more public scholarship, it's been really great as a freelancer to see so many more opportunities emerge just in the last few years. I think there's, in my just 15-year history doing this work, I feel like there's never been more of an appetite or more opportunities to do public scholarship. And that's thanks to many folks like you who have positions of power within universities and pull what levers that you can. So I think there's good work that's being done that I'm appreciative of.
Jeff and Kyati, have you seen it within universities, sort of this?
This is a big issue for us at Dartmouth College, and it comes up. And it's again, it's a little bit different for me because I came in. This is what I am. I'm a writer, so they give me credit for what I do. Although even then, I remember sort of there's a question at Dartmouth College. I made a documentary series based on a couple of my books called The Family for Netflix, and like, well, but we hired you in an English and creative writing department. You're not in a film and media department. How can we count a documentary? And they did. But I think more to the point, especially the kind of sort of activism type public education and so on, this is where faculty everywhere need to be really demanding and pushing their administrations. I mean, this is going to happen, and it has to happen now because, as everyone realizes, the right is coming for the universities. Anybody who's sitting there in a university and thinking, well, we're just neutral, not to them, you're not. They're coming. And if you want to be able to do that public work and do that public work without just being hammered and having the backing of a university, there needs to be structural recognition, including for, okay, I'm going to put my time in this and this is going to go toward tenure. But I don't think administrations are going to do that with rare exceptions unless there's unless they're pushed into it by faculty who demand it. And that's, of course, made all the more difficult by the adjunctification of the university.
Yeah, I think so. I know that I serve on, I've been on our university tenure and promotion committee and chairing it for several years. And so, in my own corner of the world, I've pushed it big time, saying, hey, we're counting this, like, we're going to look at this, right? But that's not systemic change. And we are trying to make systemic change. I think, though, we have to remember, I want to be there for those whose work lends itself to public scholarship, for those who enjoy that. I'm so thankful for colleagues who spend years of their career in the archives doing the work so that I can understand things better and then explain it. So we need, I don't want to be pushing my colleagues and friends who their happy places in those archives and doing the work there that allows others to do the work. I think actually the bit about public scholarship is something really to put in from the associate level to the full professor level. Because also those who are junior faculty, they've been trained in a certain way. And then all of a sudden, the second or third year to say to them, hey, you need to be doing this, some can handle it. And for some, it's incredibly jarring. I mean, I love the public stuff. That's why I do it, right? And luckily, it ended up counting. But I think strategically, the place to put it in is to build it in between associate and full.
I think that's probably right. It's safer that way in some ways for the individual, right?
Yeah, and I think, don't you think, it allows for more flexibility, then we could also say, associate and above is also about service, right? Well, it can be service to the community. It can be not just service to the university, which is kind of inferred in some places and indirectly there. I mean, so much of this is indirect and not written down anyway, right? So, yeah.
Jeffrey Wheatley asked a really good question. What similarities and differences do you see between teaching our students, who are a sort of public, right, and the broader public engagement that you guys have been discussing? What insights and skills and strategies transfer, do you think? Andrew, you want to take a stab at it first?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, they're so different. I mean, university teaching, it's such a narrow wedge of humanity, and there's diversity within, but mostly it's kids within the same age range and often similar backgrounds. And then doing open mics or doing road gigs where like it is a complete random cross-section of people in a comedy audience, many of whom don't even want to be there, right? It's some open mic at a bar and they didn't even know there's going to be comedy, right? So when you take away that self-selection, you get a very different cross-section. And Jeff, that's across that wide cross-section. I mean, I think of your like shoe leather reporting as something that's much more in tune with cross-sections of America than I am. Like you're driving around at night and like talking to people at Dunkin' Donuts. I'm at a club and that's a very different vibe. So I don't want to say that I'm that deeply connected to folks, but when we're engaging with an audience that isn't just university students, but such a cross-section, you end up needing to make some judgment calls about how you frame yourself and how you frame religion, because there's so much more like quick training that has to happen, right? You have to explain, okay, I'm a religion scholar, but that means I study it in this way. And you also have to get them to trust you. One of the important things to get a laugh is for you to build trust, then expectation, and then violate that expectation with a twist. And so for the broadest public facing work, it's usually zooming out to the very, top of the big pyramid before trying to come in with a specific point. And university students are kind of more ready for whatever you're going to say, I think.
Yeah. Jeff, what do you think? Are there skills and strategies that transfer?
Well, I was going to say these things are just really very separate for me because the kind of writing I do, I don't actually really think about it. I hate the writers like I write for myself. No, I'm hoping people will read it, but I don't know who they are, and I'm just going to write it the way it is. At the same time, I like that phrase you use, Andrew, quick training, and I think about that in the sense, especially the way religion can sometimes come sideways into a story, and you need to orient a reader to some information. I'm not usually in the sort of the explaining part of things, right? I'm more in the narrative part of things. But I think a while ago I was writing about Trump rallies in the 2020 campaign and traveling around the country going to Trump rallies and hearing these people talk about these QAnon ideas that at first sort of seemed to me like, oh, that seems sort of like the kind of a bastardized kind of new age version of Gnosticism. And then discovering that in fact, they knew the term and they thought that that's what they were doing. So now you're in this kind of, there's a quick training because I want to tell the story. Now, this is not going to be an essay about Gnosticism. Now, let me explain to you the history of this and explain to you how it becomes distorted into this thing and how what they're doing is not in fact Gnosticism. But to find a kind of metaphor, the quick training is in some ways a kind of find the metaphorical resonances that you can sort of fold into that story that people can recognize. And even then, I mean, it ended up happening that Elaine Pagels hadn't read the piece, but someone had told her that I had claimed that these people were Gnostics, which was not the case, and she was very indignant. And I said, no, they're not Gnostics. They haven't read your book, I'm afraid, but they do have this concept of what it means. And I think scholars have to actually get comfortable with that too, that these ideas, people are going to take them and do what they want with them. And it's not enough to say, but you are wrong. you have to say, well, what do you think this thing is? What is this thing to you? And then maybe find that quick training to bridge that gap.
Kyati, what's your experience?
Well, yeah, I teach at a university where a lot of my kids are putting themselves through, and they're taking care of parents at home. We have a large immigrant population. We have a large working class population. And so, and during COVID, it's just, you know, I have to be prepared that they've not done any of the readings. And so actually that's my public work, right? No one's reading before I'm presenting. And so I will say that that has helped me just be less stressed. I also know that the COVID piece is hard. 98% are being truthful about what goes on. Every once in a while, somebody's, you know, not being truthful and trying to take advantage of your flexibility. But I don't worry about that because unfortunately, most of my students need that flexibility. But I would just say that I think through the pandemic, the work that I've done outside of the classroom has actually helped me, I think, be more effective and certainly be more caring and compassionate within the classroom. Because I have things ready to go, like the way, Andrew, you were talking about that quick reframing, you know, the quick pivot, the quick, you know, whatever. Yeah.
I want to think about some of these new online platforms that we're talking about religion dispatches. There's the Conversation, which has a lot of good pieces in it as well. There are a number, and Washington Post puts out a lot of good pieces, and a number of my colleagues write for religion there. But how do you think these various online platforms you've worked with, or in Jeff's case, helped create, how have they changed the playing field? You know, and the fact that now, unlike say Tillich and Niebuhr, people can talk back, right? So social media plays a role in this, as well as these new platforms. Jeff, as someone who's been involved in creating them, how do you think this has changed things from 20 years ago?
I mean, I sort of come of age with them, so it's and because I come from outside the academy, I'm not as fully knowledgeable as what it was before. You know, I mentioned Killing the Buddha, and then after that, I ended up at NYU Center for Religion and Media, which was sort of religious studies, performance studies, and anthropology, all kind of meeting together. And they hired me as a journalist to make this publication that we ended up calling The Revealer, which still exists and is in fact one of these great places also where you can do this kind of work. And yeah, you get into that conversation. Well, one thing that I would say is interesting is that I look at the contemporary far right, and I think back to The Revealer in the early 2000s. And because we were writing about religion, and you would have scholars who were then getting in conversation with right-wing intellectuals like Rod Dreher, who is an extreme, he was not nearly as far right then as he is now. Now I think he's a fairly dangerous individual, but this was from a very different place. He wanted to have that conversation. So suddenly that opened up, and yeah, people are talking back. I think pushing religious studies, as far as I can tell, out of what I think it's been, religious studies scholars are sort of aware of this and have been aware of this and moved along, but it's still, there's still, you know, some American Protestant DNA and religious studies. And I think a lot of that public engagement is compelling religious studies to think beyond that. And so I think that's absolutely a positive outcome of this.
That's a really good point. Kyati, I'm going to throw this to you. Andrew was talking about sort of quick instruction. This kind of goes off what Jeff was just saying. What methods do you think are most appropriate for teaching about religion outside academic spaces?
Well, it depends on what your objective is. I think that whether it's religion or my other part of my world is race, that I kind of, I'm talking to folks about, is really hearing from people. Right now, because people didn't learn about religion in school, and unless they were a religious studies major or minor, they didn't learn about it. Folks are actually kind of hungry to learn information, but also I see a huge need for a place to be able to kind of process. I've been fortunate enough, different churches have invited me to talk about white Christian privilege. And I will say that that's probably one of my most favorite audiences to speak to and kind of work with and hang out with. And you really do need a place where you can kind of ask questions and process information instead of just it constantly being thrown out at you. So that's hard work. I mean, there's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of thought that has to go into a good, if you're going to do like a focus group, discussion group type of thing, but they are incredibly impactful for those who attend. And I think then that's what can actually lead to people making change.
Andrew, I think of your work in Zara. I mean, you're talking about some sort of ground issues in religion and how it's lived in people's lives, and you're using humor. I mean, that seems like to me, I try to be funny in the classroom. They thought I was funnier 25 years ago. My humor is getting old. But yeah, I mean, how do you instruct in religion in that sort of setting?
Good question. Yeah, and I get that about your humor. You get good. I feel like that's the problem with dad jokes, right? Is you get good at telling jokes that your kids like, and then they get older and those jokes aren't funny anymore, but you got so good at those jokes. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, I think that, every audience is its own world. And sometimes, and improv versus stand-up can be such different experiences, but what I think is really unique about instructing religion in the mode of doing comedy is that with comedy, it's kind of really easy to get people on your side. Once someone's laughing, and once you have your good openers that you've done it 100 times, and this joke functions really precisely in this, scene or as my opening joke, because it sets me up as this kind of character, gets a laugh, does X, Y, Z. You get to build yourself a whole lot of space. When I teach stand-up, we're always trying to maximize for young students the number of laughs per minute, right? We really don't want any dead time. I want every joke to get a laugh, is what I'm always telling them. Once you get a little more practiced, you can build up those laughs for 5 minutes, earn some trust. And I feel like I have more space at that 5 to 8 minute window like that. I can take 3 minutes or 5 or 10 and kind of do whatever I want because I've got everybody, with me. And it takes, sometimes an audience never gets there. You have to keep trying out other material to get them where you want them. And what has been really nice about that type of comedy is that, yeah, you get to maybe have a little bit less stress than what the two of y'all go through. I mean, it sounds like my publics are a little bit more jovial and the topic is obviously less fraught and important, but as a result, it can be, I don't know, fun sometimes to do that work. Well, I encourage y'all to do some stand-up, and then we can all go on a tour together and we can see how it feels.
Take it on the road. No, what I really hoped to do with this session is to get people to think about what skills and expertise they have that can be used. Might be like one of you three, it might be very different, but all three of you came to this through different routes, and you're all addressing something that's deadly important. And sorry to say, it's deadly important right now in the country. And I think the more of us who can get involved in this, the better. So I believe we're at the end of our hour. I really want to say thanks to all our panelists here. This has been fabulous. Keep in mind, I see that they've put up this announcement here as well about season 3 coming next year. And also in the link in the chat, if you'll hit the link, there's a very short survey. And we always like to hear from our people. Joseph started off by telling us what we're hearing from our folks. But again, Kyati, Jeff, Andrew, thank you very much. So I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Oh.
Take care, everybody.